listeners, and welcome back to the SKYLIT Books podcast series. You're here for another SKYLIT author discussion. I'm here today with the author of the book Stock Photo in the Object Lesson series from Bloomsbury and The Atlantic, Simona Supekar. How are you doing?
I'm great, Justin. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So we're going to have an event, an Object Lessons event in the store on Thursday, March 12th. It's with you, and it's with author Anjali Angetti for her book on ballots, or Ballot is the title, with moderator Taz Ahmed. So I hope folks come out to that event, but we're here to talk to you today. Can you give folks a sense of what your book is about? It's called Stock Photo, but what does the book cover?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I guess I described Stock Photo as part memoir and part cultural criticism around this particular form of media called stock photography. And I use my experience and my background keywording stock photo images over 20 years ago to help frame a discussion about the role of stock photos in creating ideas around representation. And I also look at things like the history of stock photography. I delve a little bit into the history of photography to kind of frame that discussion as well.
The Object Lesson series, there's a lot of different approaches throughout it. There's over 100 books, a lot of different approaches. What made you think, I mean, obviously you have a background in stock photography, but what made you come to this approach?
I had read a number of the books before I wrote this one, and I had also written an Object Lessons essay on bumper stickers for The Atlantic years ago as well. So I was sort of familiar with the different ways that writers approach it. And I think for me, there were several considerations. So one was that there isn't a lot of scholarship around stock photography that exists. There are only a handful of academic books, and there are quite a few peer-reviewed journals. So I read all of those, but I didn't, there isn't this like wealth of writing about it. A lot of the books about stock photography are instruction manuals on how to become a stock photographer. So I kind of felt like my memoir and speaking with the people that I worked with was a way to incorporate some primary source material into the book, because a lot of the people I spoke with were really knowledgeable about, their area in the stock photo world. And so I wanted to highlight their knowledge. And then the other thing about memoir too, for me, is that there also just aren't that many memoirs written by South Asian women. And so I wanted to kind of incorporate sort of my experiences a little bit more to frame that discussion about representation, because I wasn't sure where the reader would be coming from necessarily when they, engage with my discussion around representation in the South Asian community. So I wanted to incorporate a little bit more of my background in that arena.
A lot of the book reflects on what the representation in stock photos does kind of in the digital space, not only like in terms of like keywords, but like how it's teaching AI, because most of the AI is working from data sets that traditionally skew like white, hetero, cis. You talk a lot about hands and how white hands usually have their keyword with like giving things or being open, and people of color, their hands are like begging, like when their hands are shown. Can you talk a little bit about that, I guess?
Yeah, and I think that's part of what kind of interested me. What started this exploration was that I had this job where I was assigning terms to images, and I really enjoyed doing it. It felt important, but I didn't, I think, really realize the levels of importance it would have, especially when we talk about AI and how AI was trained on these data sets that are, these image text pairs. And the text part of that image text pair are these keywords and captions that are attached to the images that the AI was trained on. So, those words that we were typing in to these platforms will shape how people, find images and feel about the image when they find it. And that example that I put in the book was an actual example I found where I did see, a hand that appeared to be white, keyworded with, more positive affective terms. And then this hand by a person of color, a hand of a person of color, keyworded with a different affective terms that were like, I think poverty was one of them, and a couple of other keywords too. And so just noticing that difference, that's a microcosm of what the larger issues are. And there's been scholarship done around the keywords. I think I cite Fernanda Carrera's work around stock images and the keywords that are assigned to them, and how there are disparities according to gender and race based on, the keywords that she was researching. So there's definitely, a real importance to how those terms are being used. And now those terms are being incorporated into prompts. So as we learn how to write prompts to generate images using the AI tools, we'll be recalling a lot of that embedded metadata in those images. And so the images that we generate will kind of connect back to some of those old keywords potentially from decades ago. So that's something that interested me as I was writing. And I think it's what made the book very timely too.
Yeah. And another one of the anecdotes that you shared from one of your former coworkers that really stuck with me was the trying to show a client images of a black businessman. Like the search word was black businessman.
Yeah.
And it brought up an image of a black man at a bar with lines of cocaine in front of him. Like that was one of the first images to come up. It's insane.
Yeah, and I think it's why a lot of these new stock, photography companies are like PocStock, who I referenced in that anecdote. They're trying to really focus on people who have not been represented well in media, making sure that the representations of marginalized folks, minoritized folks are equitable and characterize people in ways that they want to be characterized so that they have ownership over their own images more.
It's not the only focus of the book, but you do start the book sort of framing it that you're writing it at the time of genocide in Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
And a little later in the book, you discuss the phrase like, you can't be what you can't see. And then you think, well, sometimes it's you can't be what others choose not to see. Can you talk about why you brought that in? What struck you that made you bring that into the text?
Well, like you mentioned, I was writing a book about imagery at the exact time that I was witnessing a genocide unfold in Palestine through social media. And my background in undergraduate was in post-colonial literary theory, and I was, reading a lot of theory about colonization and texts about colonization. So it was impossible for me to write a book about imagery without discussing what was happening at the time that I was writing. And I was just so struck by, I think I mentioned, just the silence around Palestine and what was happening to tens of thousands of people being murdered by the Israeli government and funded by my own government. And, to me, it really called into question, I guess, something that I was trying to explore in the book, which is who gets to be human and how do we portray humanity in these images, and how is it manifesting in the images that unfold in front of us. So I began the book that way. And then I also, I interviewed a Palestinian stock photographer and, discussed some of his concerns around representation. And I included a few of the images from the Middle Frame, which is the company, and, wanted to just show how there are different ways of showing different people, and the way that we represent people in this proliferation of images can really impact over time how we view different communities. And that's why it was really important for me to address the connection between the genocide in Palestine and the images that exist in proliferation in these data sets. And then also just the connection to tech and how tech is complicit in some of what's happening and what we're seeing in the broader world. And that's why I put that line in there, because a lot of this is about, once I think I mentioned in the beginning, once you see things, you can't unsee them. And that's, what I wanted to explore in the book.
Yeah. I guess getting back to the other part of that, of you can't be what you can't see, you talk a little bit about finding comfort in doing stock searches, because then you can find images of South Asian people. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I probably have a unique relationship to stock photos in that I think about them. I know a lot of people, just in the process of writing this book, have spoken about how they've never given a thought to a stock photo. They're virtually invisible to them, right? And I think I mentioned an old study, it's 2010, I think, a Nielsen study about how people generally ignore stock photos on a website. But I think, especially if you're from an underrepresented group, you do notice things. You do notice when you aren't visible in places and when you are visible in places. So I do notice when I see South Asians represented, often as doctors in things like TV shows or pamphlets or, any other kinds of media representation. So I just find stock photography interesting. Obviously, I have a bias because I keyworded them, but also because there's just so many of them. And so I think I cite Bell Hooks's concept of this diasporic landscape of longing, which is something that really spoke to me in her book, Art on My Mind, A Visual Politics. And so she references this concept of just if you're from a community that's either been colonized or you've migrated or there's some movement in your history, you think about home or you think about the concept of home. And I guess for me, because of the breadth and scope of all of these images, I'm able to see things about India, that I don't see every day in other places. And what was so interesting is that interesting to me was while I was keywording, I would keyword things like hennaed hands or different temples throughout India. I keyworded so many temples, so many landscapes, so many images of food and different types of Indian food. So for me, that was like the closest I could get to, my mother country. I was born in the United States and just rarely get to go back to India. So a lot of those things that I keyworded taught me about my own culture in ways. And I think that it had a subliminal kind of effect on me. So I think I mentioned that, like, eventually, I hennaed my hands for my own wedding. And I look at, the photos, my own wedding photos, and they look slightly similar to the photo that I put in the book of, another woman dressed in some traditional clothing. And so I'm pretty sure that those images had an impact on me that I'm not fully aware of. And I wanted to explore that idea a little more.
It is interesting, too, because you have a short chapter about food photography. And one of the things you mentioned, in addition to the fact that like Mexican food never is very authentic, is that pretty much any Indian food is just keyworded curry, whether it's a curry or not. It just says curry.
Yes. Yeah. Even like I mentioned dal, which is, not usually considered curry. And then my son wrote, an essay about curry. And so it's just interesting, I think, to see, this is a huge country with so many different cultures and foods other than curry, but curry is sort of a stand-in for Indian food oftentimes. So,
yeah.
And that happens visually as well.
Yeah. You said the word landscape, so it reminded me, you said you wanted to read from your chapter on landscapes. I do think it's really interesting because it is one of the types of stock photography where you don't have to worry about the models. Like the landscape, usually doesn't require a release. So
yeah, sure. I'll just read a part of it, not the whole thing. The most viewed photograph of all time is likely a stock photo landscape people saw powering on their computers every morning for almost 2 decades. The Windows XP wallpaper called Bliss, taken in 1996 by photographer Charles O'Rear, was a stock image of hills in Sonoma County, California. O'Rear sold the image, originally titled Bucolic Green Hills, to the Westlight stock photo agency, later acquired by Corbis. The image is widely believed to be the most viewed photograph ever because of the operating system's commercial success. Nearly 2 decades later, Microsoft would quietly phase out clip art and eventually offer royalty-free stock photos right within Word to its Microsoft 365 subscribers. Sarah, the photographer I worked with who sold the yucca for $30,000, loves to shoot landscapes because they can be used conceptually in a number of ways. She described to me how, as a photo editor, she envisioned shoots on a macro level to see how everything is interconnected. She says, let's say you have a blooming fern leaf. To some people, that's a scientific image of a particular plant, and they might want it for, let's say, a science book. For somebody else, it might be an example of springtime. So now it's bringing a little more of an emotional connection or talking about a genre of a calendar year. And then you go a bit further, and now it's about growth and developments, or birth. Landscapes also do not require model releases, which, she says, are harder to get signed because models are becoming wary of how their images are used. Dozens of social media posts and articles like 18 people who probably regret becoming stock photo models prove this to be true. However, the Eiffel Tower, one of the most popular types of cityscapes, even requires permissions to be shot at night. The lighting itself is considered intellectual property under French law. Not only do natural landscapes effectively convey concepts like adventure, yearning, escape, sustainability, faith, and other aspirational ideas that are perfect for calendars, greeting cards, or websites, but they typically provide ample copy space for text. These images, often keyworded, or sometimes keyworded, pristine landscape, number in the tens of thousands. What else is an expansive cerulean blue for but to remind consumers of a brand's value proposition? Many stock landscape shots and video clips you see now are probably shot with drones. Hal and his wife Elizabeth are LA-based stock photographers who pivoted to using drones in early 2020 when the pandemic made it nearly impossible to shoot images with models. They made a list of cities and traveled around the country collecting what could be establishing shots of nearly every major and many smaller cities. I went to art school, but I live in spreadsheets, Hal chuckled when he described the process. Their establishing shots have been licensed for political campaigns, news cutaways, listicles such as the 10 best cities for job seekers over 50, and in streaming video, citing the LuLaRoe documentary as a recent example. One of their recent client requests was for a private jet series with people of color, a shoot that looked incredibly fun to produce. They shot on a decommissioned jet at an airport in Fresno with a diverse cast that included a South Asian actor, keyworded young techie. One of the images from the jet shoot ended up on an episode of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver that examined the Boeing plane crashes, and another on an article about the youngest Black pilot. Hal's are among just a handful of stock images available of Black women pilots that I could find. During the early stages of the pandemic, searches for natural landscapes increased as more people were spending time outdoors. Whether it was misty mountain ranges, seascapes, national parks, Provence lavender fields, the hypnotic texture of Vietnamese rice paddies, or aerial shots of paths winding through the Amazon, I saw so much of the world's natural beauty through keywording, and, like Walter Mitty, daydreamed about a time when I could visit it. Data fueled by AI tools on one stock site show that mountains are more popular for ads than beaches, and that valleys, cliffs, and trails are especially powerful images to make consumers click. Of course, that kind of ultra-capitalist juxtaposition feels unsettling. A best-selling image of a mountain range in Banff National Park, Canada, graces not only articles about Canada, but about God's power to move obstacles, economic initiatives for Indigenous communities, climate-friendly hamburgers, a quiz called Which Continent Should I Live In?, addiction websites, and numerous wall calendars. While John Berger is known for his seminal Ways of Seeing, I think some of his best writing concerns Palestine, especially that of his 2003 trip to Ramallah. I have never seen such a light before, he writes. It comes down from the sky in a strangely regular way, for it makes no distinction between what is distant and what is close. And this affects the way you place yourself. It affects your sense of being here. The land arranges itself around you rather than confronting you. Upon seeing the artist Randa Mada's installation, Puppet Theater, transform a Ramallah parking lot floor, Berger coined the term landswept to denote a place or places where everything, both material and immaterial, has been brushed aside, purloined, swept away, blown down, irrigated off, everything except the touchable earth. My friend Layla reiterates this connection to the earth when I shared Berger's concept of landswept with her and characterizes the dirt in Palestine as powdery and as traveling with her as she walks. She describes stone terraces unlike anything we would find in the United States. Dotted with olive trees, I have been able to find quite a few of in stock photography. She says that for her, Palestine is her aunt's apartment in Lyd, where she can hear the call for prayer and the church bells at the same time. If you're sitting on her couch, literally you'll hear a van, church bells, and like a chicken. All of a sudden, you're like, it's like all of these worlds. And for me, there's such a peace going back to such a chaotic place. And I wish that's how things always were, because then the soldiers come in and disrupt everything. But when that is not happening, that is my feeling.
So good. I told you before, but I really enjoyed reading this book, and I'll just say, I think folks should read this book.
Thank you.
What? It's hard to get out of that. You mentioned in there a friend of yours who was a stock photographer that got a $30,000 payday for a photograph of a yucca.
Yes.
And later in your book, you talk about a photographer whose image was used on the cover of Future's DS2 album that they got $80 for.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, the shifting in the industry from one time to another in that way?
Yeah, that's a great topic, and one that came up a lot, I think, in my conversations. The industry, I was sort of working, I think, at maybe the peak, I would say, of the industry when photographers could still make a decent living. I think I cited, an average salary of $70,000 a year or something. And so there were a lot of photographers who were able to make money as stock photographers. And then this whole media landscape has evolved in different stages for stock photography. So we're sort of in what's called the micro stock stage, where there are websites that can kind of churn out a lot of images, and the photographers just don't get paid as much as they do anymore for them, regardless of how the image is used. If it's a royalty-free image, which means that you kind of pay a flat rate and then it can be used multiple times, then you might, as a photographer, find that you're not making what you once would have if you had been doing this 20 years ago. We have a lot more people in general who are photographers. We have these wonderful advances with smartphones, so people can take photos using high quality equipment, just at the touch of their touch screen with their smartphone there. So you've got a lot of people now who can take images and submit them and become a contributor, whereas before you would often need a lot of the specialized equipment, these cameras that can be quite expensive. So there are many reasons, why all of this has changed, but I think one thing is that we have more people who can take photographs. And so there are just a lot of images online. Anyone can sign up and be a contributor to many of these websites. But that also means that, that's more competition for people who have been doing this for a long time. And so I think that's definitely a place of consternation for many stock photographers. And I think I describe, a couple people in the book who have either decided not to do as much stock or to pull some of their stock, off of the sites. and focus more on their fine art photography or other areas of their life. Just digital changed a lot of things too. So going from film to digital, that was a really big step in the stock photography like landscape. And that was one of the major things that happened before, like right before I started keywording. So there are just all of these technological advancements have changed the landscape a lot. And it's really kind of interesting to watch. And I think I cite some of the history too, which is that people, from the scholarship I read, people believe that this sort of evolved from like stereoscopes. And so, if you look at the old kind of technology that predates stock photography, it's really fascinating to think about how something like stereoscopes are not in wide use anymore. But I think I mentioned that stock photography seems to keep, revisiting and changing and adapting to the times, as it seems to be now with AI as well. So it feels like it's an enduring form, even if I think probably a lot of people have left the field over time because they weren't getting paid what they deserved.
You have a few sort of discussions of like the difference between human made stock and the new sort of AI generated stock, and I like the anecdote you shared about your kids' thought on it. Can you share that here?
Yeah. Let's see if I can find maybe that line so I cite him correctly. In this chapter, I was really, and so just to note that this, I wrote this part right when a lot of this technology was coming out, sometime in 2023. And so, I was really just trying to understand it. And I think, even probably the people I interviewed, they may have evolved or they may have different feelings about AI since we had these discussions. But I was trying to understand, what the value of having AI images could be. And I know that, and so I had a very hefty research process. I watched a lot of webinars and attended talks and tried to read as much as I could just to really understand how this was working. And I think the AI images provide one way to increase, for instance, representation, right? And so that's being put forward as a solution for having more control over whatever images you want in the world. And so I was trying to think about what the drawbacks of that were and what the repercussions of doing that would be. And so there was just so much about the power of AI. And I was just really paying attention to the rhetoric used around AI and what it could do. And I think I was talking to my kid about it. And at the time, he was only like 6 or something. But he was talking about Pokemon. And so what I wrote here is I describe a scene from Plato's Republic. And I write here, in Book 10 of Plato's Republic, Socrates describes 3 beds, one made by God, one made by a carpenter inspired by gods, and one made by a painter inspired by the carpenter. He asks, shall we also say that the painter is the creator and maker of that sort of thing? To this, Glaucon replies, by no means. The most reasonable designation for him is that he is the imitator of the thing which those others produce. Can this scenario give us a framework for understanding AI-generated images? Or to put it in Pokemon terms, my kid's favorite is Mew because Mewtwo thinks he's really strong, but he's actually kind of dumb. Mew has the DNA of all the Pokemon and is made from nature. Mewtwo is like made from man. And
yeah.
And so when he was talking about it, we weren't talking about AI. He was just telling me about his favorite Pokemon. And I was like, well, why don't you like Mewtwo if he's so strong? And he's so powerful. And so he tells me why. And as he's describing this, because of the headspace I was in at the time, I immediately just made the connection to AI. And I was thinking about how there are all these sort of innovative and exciting things being discussed around AI, but, how many of those things do we need? And what will be the repercussions of that? And so I just found this to be, I don't know, a kind of interesting metaphor, especially juxtaposing it against a more literary metaphor right beforehand.
Yeah. I loved that those two things in short succession. That was a great paragraph.
Thank you.
I was curious. So talking about things that have maybe changed a little bit since you wrote them, you talk a lot about how many of the companies, and sort of after the reckoning of the George Floyd murder, that there was a lot more initiatives to be more inclusive, to have a sort of diverser quality of stock, and apart from like you said, POC stock and some of the LGBTQ stock companies that are training AI on their own material, has there been a creep back, or are they still sort of holding firm with trying to incorporate this more diverse material, from what you can tell?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We've obviously witnessed there's been definitely a rollback on any kind of, on many promises of DEI and inclusion, throughout the country. And I would expect that there would be some ripple effect in every industry to some extent. But I think there are some companies that built their whole business model around having inclusive imagery, and those places are ramping everything up and making sure that those assets are there to help, ensure that there's equitable representation everywhere. But that's a really good question. I haven't followed up as much to see, how much of that landscape has changed recently. But based on what I'm seeing, I think that there are still definitely companies committed to having inclusive imagery, regardless of what's happening with our administration and the political atmosphere that we're in right now. I also am sure that, there are companies that are not doing that too. And but that's a great question. It is something that I would like to kind of circle back on, and explore.
Well, you talk a lot about what is keyworded as beautiful in stock collections, and I think that's interesting. You also talked about in addition to sort of like the types of people, you talked about like the appearance of body hair and stuff like that. Can you talk a little bit about those topics?
So, I think, I began the book talking about Lisa Nakamura's concept of cyber types, and how this is a term that a scholar coined in the early 2000s, when we were seeing more, a turn to a digital world. And so cyber types are these images usually of race that are created in a digital sense. One of the premises of the book is really, how did I create a cyber type of people, right? If I'm keywording images with certain terms like beautiful, like affective terms, then how am I creating, these cyber types of communities throughout the world, especially communities who are oppressed? So that was a big consideration for me. And just thinking about stock photos in general. The great thing I think I mentioned is that there are companies and people trying to offer differing ideas of what beauty is, or beauty standards are, showing people with body hair, showing people in ways that they haven't been shown before in stock photos. I think that is really exciting to see, like a lot of, like feminist stock photo websites. I think I talked about Refinery 29 had been doing some collections. And so there have been more initiatives recently to offer differing ideas about these affective terms that you often find in stock photos. And that's really exciting to me. And it needs to keep happening. And we need to see more of that.
Yeah, agreed. Toward the end of the book, you get into the ways that I think a lot of people engage with stock photos, which is either as memes or
Yes.
as just like, funny, WTF, that kind of thing. Could you talk a little bit about what you discovered about that stuff?
Yeah, memes, so many of them, do originate from stock photos that have gone viral. I think I mentioned the distracted boyfriend meme, which is, it's been, when I did a reverse image search, it's been online over 30,000 times or something. And it's, just been, it never goes away. It's really been absorbed into the consciousness. So, people superimpose all kinds of ideas on that meme. What's interesting about memes is that they are also, removed from their place in time and space. They can become anything, right? And they can really absorb whatever messages are put on them. And so, of course, I like the funny ones. There are funny memes that are enjoyable. I had that in the chapter called Recycling. And I think one of the things I mentioned in there is how my sister introduced me to the sort of meme celebrity, Andras Arato. And I really had no idea about this series of memes. I don't know, somehow I had missed it.
Wait, is he Hide the Pain Harold?
Hide the Pain Harold, yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, so I actually watched his TED Talks, and I just loved how much he got into it and really embraced, his persona. And then one of the things I mentioned is that so many comments on his TED Talks were like, he's so authentic. And so I just thought it was really interesting that memes could also feel very authentic to people, and that, seeing this person kind of have this smile that, is unsure is something that we can all relate to. And that originated from stock photography. Yeah, I mean, they've become a currency in our culture. We share our ideas about them. Yeah. And I like that there's a connection to stock photos there.
And you, I think in the chapter before is the one that's funny. It talks also about how sometimes the captions for these stock photos are very elaborate and odd. When you were keywording, was there sort of like a protocol of like try to get as many of these type of words into captions and into keywords, or how do we end up with some of this word salad, I guess is the question.
Right. Yeah. That's a really good question. I think so and it's different. I don't want to speak on behalf of every keyword or every system, but from what I recall, when I did it, we would receive information from the photographer. So there would often be a caption that the photographer would provide, information about the model. So the model had to sign a model release. And so that's where we got the information about the model. It was like self-identified information from the model. So that's what would go into the caption and keywords usually. So, if it was a particular locale, then that would usually be in the caption. Some of these other captions that are really extra I'm not sure where they come from. To be honest. I don't know if it's, I think now sometimes it's photographers that might caption their own, photos, or I'm not sure. But it is really interesting to see the captions. But I think when I was doing it, I was typically more literal and kind of more short and to the point with the caption.
Nice. You do also make use of one that the Onion used, that they put under the headline. It's a picture of a man blowing a trumpet on a stool, and the headline is this the new face of jazz, or Getty Images stock photo number LS008662? So.
Yeah, and that is actually the real number in Getty Images. So Yeah, to answer the question of the headline, it is actually
not
a
the
Getty
new Space and Jazz, yeah.
Right. And that's what's so interesting, because it calls into question how many of the images that we're looking at on things are, real images of people, or are they stock images? And I think, interestingly, stock images have gotten so sophisticated, and they're really, really beautiful ones now. So sometimes it's hard to tell if it's a stock image or a fine art image. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really enjoyed hearing, from the person I interviewed at The Onion about how they use the stock photos, because they use them quite often. And you start to see the same, occasionally you'll see the same person come up over and over again in Onion articles, the same stock photo person. And yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. It gave me a quick flash. When I lived in New York, I worked for a while at an exploitation movie company. And I realized, looking at a bunch of their movie posters on the walls, that the posters rarely had the people in the movies in them. Like, I presume that the movies themselves didn't have good enough still photos, so they just would stage actors to make a more exciting poster for their movie. I don't know if anyone ever complained that, whoever the actor is in, like, Blaze for Glory or whatever it was called was not actually on the poster or whatever. But
yeah, that's so funny. I think, it's like sometimes with these establishing shots or the stock video footage that people shoot, you might see it at the beginning of a show, but you'll never see it again for the rest of the show because it's not really shot there. It's shot in LA somewhere or wherever. So, and I think I referenced how, someone got in trouble, a politician, was it Jeb Bush, got in trouble for using stock video footage that was shot in England.
Right.
And so the creator said something like, "It's good to know the American dream is alive and well in a field in Cornwall, England."
Right. Excellent. That's the perfect note to end on for today. But folks should come back, should come to our store Thursday, March 12th for our in-store event. You can also pick up a copy of Stock Photo while you're there. I'm sure it's going to be an excellent event. It's you. It's Anjali Angetti with Ballot and then moderator Taz Ahmed. That's going to be exciting. If you're not able to make it to the event, you can still order the book from SKYLITBooks.com. That would be great. Thank you so much for being with us. Did you have anything you wanted to plug at the end?
I think I just want to thank you, Justin, for this. This has been amazing. And I hope you check out my friend Anjali's book, Ballot. And I'm looking forward to seeing everyone.
Excellent. Simona Supekar, thank you again.
Thank you.
Have a great one.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the SKYLIT Books podcast series. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to check out the book featured in this episode, or others, please visit skylitbooks.com. If you're in the Los Angeles area, stop by for one of our live in-person author events. You can find a calendar on our website. If you like this podcast, leave us a review. It really helps us out. Our music is by Duck the Piano Wire. Till next time.